The morning sun poured over the red earth like warm honey, bathing the village in a soft golden light. Ebony moved quietly through the narrow paths, her bare feet tracing patterns in the dust. She carried a bundle of palm fibers on her head, the same way her mother had once taught her, the weight steady and comforting. Her home stood near the edge of the village, small, humble but filled with the fragrance of herbs and dried reeds. Inside, half-finished mats hung from the walls, each one a story woven in color and care. Ebony's fingers, slender and graceful, were known across the village for creating mats so intricate that elders said even the ancestors paused to admire them. But admiration was not the same as respect. The people praised her work yet mocked her person. Too quiet, they whispered. Too soft to survive. The rich families saw her silence as surrender, her bowed head as weakness. She greeted even those who insulted her with warmth, her eyes calm, her tone gentle. To her, respect was not something demanded, it was a gift given from the heart. Yet in a world where pride roared louder than kindness, such a heart was often trampled. Among her loudest critics was Olamide, the chief's daughter, a woman of beauty adorned daily in gold beads and fine wrappers. Her laughter echoed wherever she went, sharp and bright like a blade. Olamide could not understand Ebony. To her, power meant being seen and strength meant being feared. She often mocked Ebony in public, calling her, the girl who boasts so much she'll dig her own grave. The villagers laughed, eager to please their chief's daughter. Ebony only smiled faintly, bowing again before turning away, her dignity wrapped in silence. Her mother would often watch her return home, head low but spirit unbroken. "Child," she'd say softly, "they do not know what respect truly is. It is not in loud words or heavy jewelry. It is in the way you hold your peace when others lose theirs." Ebony would nod, her eyes distant, wondering why humility felt so heavy to carry. At night she would weave under the glow of a clay lamp, her fingers dancing over threads dyed in shades of earth and sky. Each mat she made seemed to whisper her thoughts, patience, hope, and quiet resilience. Sometimes children came to watch her work, their laughter filling the hut. She would tell them stories of the patterns, how the spirals meant unity, the zigzags symbolized struggle, and the borders stood for protection. The children listened wide-eyed, learning not only the art but the wisdom hidden in every weave. It was in those moments Ebony felt seen, not for her silence but for her spirit. Still, when the village held gatherings, she always sat at the back. The elders barely noticed her presence. Her name was never called when praise was given. Olamide would stride to the center, accepting admiration for wearing jewels her father bought, while Ebony's hands, the same hands that made the mats they all sat upon, remained folded quietly in her lap. Yet she never complained. Deep down she believed that pride built walls but humility built bridges. On one such morning, as she finished a mat woven for the coming festival, she paused to look at her reflection in the water pot beside her. Her eyes were tired but kind, her face marked with traces of sun and honesty. She smiled faintly, adjusting a loose braid. "Let them laugh," she whispered to her reflection. "Even a bowed tree still gives shade." And as the distant drums of the chief's courtyard echoed through the village, Ebony gathered her mats, ready to step once again into a world that mocked her for the very virtue that made her strong, unaware that the day would soon come when those same voices would bow before her. The day of the festival dawned bright and loud, the air trembling with the rhythm of drums and the chatter of villagers. The annual celebration was a time of color and pride, when dancers painted their faces with white ash, warriors oiled their spears to gleam in the sun, and artisans displayed their finest creations for the chief's approval. Stalls lined the central square, overflowing with carved masks, beaded jewelry, and embroidered cloth. The scent of roasted maize and palm wine drifted through the air, thick with anticipation. It was the day when names were made, when respect could be gained, or lost, with a single gesture. Ebony arrived quietly as she always did. She wore a simple blue wrapper, her hair tied with a strip of raffia. In her hands she carried the mat she had spent countless nights weaving, her best work yet. The fibers shimmered faintly under the sunlight, dyed in deep browns, golds, and greens. The design told a story, interlocking circles for unity, winding paths for endurance, and two hands meeting at the center, a symbol of peace. As she laid it gently on the ground before the chief's stool, murmurs rippled through the crowd. The mat was beautiful beyond measure, but its maker stood small and quiet beside it, her eyes lowered in respect. The chief leaned forward, his heavy beads clinking as he examined the mat. "This," he said thoughtfully, "speaks of harmony." For a brief moment, Abony's heart swelled with quiet hope, but it was short-lived. Olamide, standing proudly beside her father, burst into laughter that rang sharp through the silence. "Harmony," she scoffed. "Father, it looks like something a beggar would spread on the ground to sleep. Look at her, dressed like the dust itself. How can something woven by such hands bring honor to our village?" The villagers followed Olamide's lead, laughter spreading like fire through dry grass. Some covered their mouths to hide their amusement. Others laughed openly, pointing at Abony's simple clothes and bare feet. Abony's heart clenched, but she said nothing. She only bowed her head, the mat still at her feet. Her silence deepened the laughter, for in their eyes she was too timid to defend herself, the girl who bowed too easily. The chief frowned slightly, but he did not stop his daughter. To him the insult seemed harmless, just another jest. The drummers struck up another beat, and attention moved on to the next craftsman. But as the noise swelled, a faint shiver passed through the air around Abony. The mat before her caught a flicker of light that did not come from the sun, just for an instant, like something alive shifting beneath its surface. She felt it, though she did not understand it, a hum deep within her chest, ancient and steady. Abony lifted her gaze slightly, her eyes meeting the chief's for a moment before lowering again. There was no anger there, only quiet strength, the kind that neither laughter nor cruelty could destroy. As she gathered her mat and turned to leave, the crowd's laughter echoed behind her, but it no longer pierced her spirit. Each step she took away from the square carried the faint pulse of something awakening, a whisper older than the village itself, rising from the woven threads, waiting for its time to speak. Abony walked away from the village square with her head bowed, the laughter of the people still ringing in her ears. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, her mat tucked under her arm like a wound she could not hide. The world around her seemed to mock her pain. Even the crickets fell silent as if ashamed to sing. Her eyes blurred with tears and she could no longer see the path clearly. Yet her feet knew the way home, winding through the familiar forest that bordered the village. The tall trees stood like ancient guardians, their shadows stretching long and deep across the path. She stopped by the river that flowed through the forest, the place she often came to when the noise of the world became too cruel to bear. The water was calm that evening, reflecting the dying sun in trembling gold ripples. Abony knelt beside it, placing her mat on the grass. For the first time in many moons she let the tears fall freely. "What have I done to deserve their laughter?" she whispered. "All I wanted was to bring beauty, not shame." Her voice cracked and the words scattered into the wind like dry leaves. Then from across the river, a soft rustling broke the silence. Abony lifted her head. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift, and slowly a figure emerged. An old woman stepped forward, her form half hidden beneath a cloak woven from green leaves and strands of glimmering light. Her face was lined with age, yet her eyes glowed with something ageless, deep, knowing and steady. She carried a walking stick made of ebony wood and moved with the grace of someone who had walked through centuries. "Why do you weep, child of gentle hands?" the woman asked, her voice soft but filled with power. Abony blinked, startled. "Who are you, mother? I did not hear you approach." The old woman smiled faintly. "Few do. I come when the forest calls me, and today it whispered your name." She stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound on the earth. "They mocked you for bowing your head, did they not?" Abony's lips trembled. "Yes, mother. They say I bow too easily. They call me weak." The woman tilted her head, studying her with eyes that seemed to look straight through her heart. "Then they do not know the power of bowing in truth. To bow in pretense is to shrink. But to bow in truth," she raised her hand, tracing a pattern in the air. "To bow in truth is to humble the pride of kings." Abony frowned softly, trying to understand. But how can humility ever defeat pride? Pride shouts, humility whispers. The woman smiled again, this time with something like sadness. And yet, it is the whisper that lasts longest after the shout fades. She reached into the folds of her leafy cloak and drew out something small, a single golden strand of fiber, thin as a hair yet shining with its own light. "Take this," she said, placing it gently into Abony's palm. Weave it into your next mat. Do not ask how or why. Just weave it with your truth and it will speak when the time is right. Ebony looked down at the golden strand, feeling warmth spread through her fingers. What will it do, mother? She asked softly. The woman's eyes glimmered like the river under the moon. It will reveal what is hidden and teach those who scorned you the weight of true respect. Ebony tried to ask more, but a sudden gust of wind swept through the forest, and when she looked up the woman was gone. Only a few leaves spiraled where she had stood. The river rippled once as though it had spoken her farewell. Holding the golden strand close to her chest, Ebony stood in the quiet dusk, her heart both heavy and light. She did not yet understand the meaning of the woman's riddle, but deep within she felt a strange certainty, that her shame had not been for nothing, and that the forest had just handed her the beginning of something greater than vengeance, greater than pride. That night the forest seemed to follow Ebony home. The golden strand she carried glowed faintly even after she tucked it beside her mat, and its light cast moving shadows on the walls of her hut. Outside the crickets sang again, but their rhythm felt strange, like a chant. Exhaustion weighed on her, yet when she lay down to rest her mind refused to quiet. The chief's laughter, Olamide's sneer, the voice of the old woman, they all swirled inside her, colliding like wind and flame. Slowly, sleep came over her, not soft but heavy, pulling her into a darkness that was alive and whispering. In the dream, she stood in a vast plain of silver sand that shimmered like water. Above her, the sky burned with stars brighter than any she had ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of palm wine and earth after rain. From the horizon, figures began to emerge, tall, graceful women draped in flowing white robes, their heads crowned with beads and cowrie shells that caught the light. Their presence filled Ebony's chest with warmth and awe. She knew them though she had never met them. They were her blood, the mothers before her, the guardians of her line. One stepped forward, her eyes deep as midnight. "Ebony," she said, her voice like a drum's heartbeat, "child of our spirit, why do you bow in sorrow?" Ebony fell to her knees, her voice trembling. "Because they mocked me, mothers. They see humility as weakness. They trample on gentleness and call it shame." Another ancestor, tall and regal, lifted a hand to silence her. "They mock what they fear, child. They fear what they do not understand. The world bows easily to pride because it is loud, but pride crumbles when faced with truth that does not need to shout." The women began to circle her, their robes sweeping the silver sand, leaving trails of light. As they moved, scenes formed in the air, visions of queens greeting their servants with respect, of warriors kneeling before wise women, of mothers teaching sons to listen before they speak. Each image shimmered with the same lesson, that respect was not a thing granted by birth or power, but by integrity and the strength to stand firm in humility. The first ancestor spoke again. "You carry our gift in your hands, Ebony. The world will test your patience, but do not put down your truth to pick up their noise. Let your work speak, for your craft is your voice." Ebony watched as the golden strand appeared in her ancestor's palm. It glowed brighter now, alive, pulsing with light. The ancestor placed it into Ebony's hands again and whispered, "This thread carries the breath of those who came before you. We wove our hopes into it long before you were born. When you weave it, we will weave with you." A wind swept across the plain, carrying the sound of distant drums, slow, deep, and sacred. The ancestors began to fade one by one, their forms dissolving into the starlit air, until only their voices remained. "True respect is not demanded," they murmured, their tones like the rustle of palm leaves. "It is earned through the quiet courage to remain kind in a world that confuses cruelty for strength." Ebony reached out, trying to hold on to them, but the dream began to dissolve. She awoke with tears on her cheeks and her heart beating fast, the morning light filtering softly through the thatch roof. The golden strands still rested beside her, shining brighter than before. For a long moment she sat in silence, her palms tingling with energy. Then she smiled, not the soft, uncertain smile she once wore, but one steady and full of resolve. She no longer felt small. The laughter of the villagers no longer echoed inside her. Something had changed within her, a quiet fire, an invisible strength. Her hands itched to weave again, and as she picked up the golden strand, she felt the pulse of her ancestors moving through her fingers, guiding her toward her destiny. The morning after her dream, the world felt different. Sharper, brighter, alive with unseen movement. The air carried a hum she could not name, and even the smallest sounds, the chirp of birds, the sway of palm leaves, seemed to whisper her name. Ebony rose before the sun, her heart thrumming with purpose. She laid out her tools, the wooden spindle, the bundles of dyed reeds, and the golden strand that shimmered like sunlight trapped in silk. It pulsed faintly in her palm, warm and alive, as if it recognized her. She prepared her hut carefully, sweeping the floor until no dust remained, lighting a small clay lamp in the center, and whispering a short prayer to her ancestors. "Guide my hands," she murmured. "Let truth find its form through me." The moment she began weaving, a strange stillness fell over the hut. The usual hum of insects faded, and the air thickened, carrying the faint scent of rain though no storm lingered outside. Ebony started with the outer border, her fingers moving with steady rhythm. The reeds bent willingly, soft and smooth under her touch. When she reached for the golden strand, it resisted for a moment, then flowed through her fingers like warm water. As she wove it into the mat, the strand released a soft glow, spreading through the fibers until they glistened faintly in the dim light. Her breath caught. It was as if the mat was alive, breathing in time with her heartbeat. As she continued, her movements became slower, more deliberate. The patterns began to form themselves in ways she hadn't planned. The circles of unity twisted into new shapes, weaving into images that told stories beyond her understanding. Faces appearing and vanishing, figures bowing and rising, hands lifting burdens together. With each row, the mat seemed to whisper secrets, soft murmurs in a language older than memory. The more she worked, the more she felt guided by unseen hands, her fingers moved by something greater than skill. Then came the wind. It started as a faint sigh, curling through the cracks of her hut, stirring the loose fibers on the floor. Gradually, it grew stronger, swirling around her, yet not a single thread on her loom shifted out of place. The flame of the lamp leaned but did not go out. Instead, it flickered in rhythm with the mat's faint glow. Ebony paused once, her chest rising and falling in awe. "Are you here?" she whispered, glancing toward the ceiling. In answer, the golden strand brightened, casting ripples of light across the walls. The woven figures in the mat began to move, subtle at first, like shadows in water. A man appeared to kneel before a woman holding a broken staff. Beside them, a circle of villagers joined hands. The designs pulsed with life, telling stories that felt both distant and near. Tears welled in Ebony's eyes, not from fear but from wonder. She felt the presence of her ancestors again, calm, watching, proud. Hours passed without her noticing. The sun climbed and fell, and still she wove, her body weary but her spirit soaring. She forgot hunger, forgot time. It was as though she and the mat were one being, breathing together. When the final strand was woven, she tied it with trembling fingers, whispering, "It is finished." At that moment the wind stilled. The glow of the golden thread softened, settling into the fabric until it looked ordinary again. But Ebony could feel its pulse, faint but constant, like a heartbeat beneath the weave. She sat back, gazing at her creation. It was beautiful beyond measure, more than any mat she had ever made. Yet she knew beauty was not its true gift. It was power, not the loud, cruel kind that demanded worship, but a quiet strength born of truth. As dusk fell, she laid her hands gently on the mat, feeling it breathe beneath her palms. A soft voice echoed in her mind, her grandmother's or perhaps the old woman's from the forest. "When the world mocks humility, let truth speak through your hands." Ebony smiled faintly. The mat was ready, though the world was not. When the next moon rose full and round above the palm trees, the drums of the village once again filled the air. The chief had declared another exhibition, this time to restore honor among the artisans, after whispers spread that his daughter's arrogance had embarrassed the family during the last festival. The villagers gathered early, eager for spectacle, eager to laugh again or perhaps to witness something new. The scent of roasted yam and groundnut stew mingled with the heat of the morning. Women carried baskets of woven crafts, men lifted carved stools and masks, and the air buzzed with expectation. Ebony stood at the edge of the crowd, her mat rolled tightly in her hands. She had spent days preparing herself for this moment, not through vanity or pride, but through prayer and quiet resolve. Her heart no longer trembled with fear. The shame that once bent her spine had transformed into something solid, calm, steady, unshakable. She had no fine clothes, no golden ornaments. She wore a simple wrapper of indigo cloth, tied neatly at her waist. Yet when she stepped forward, heads turned. There was something different in her movement, a poise that did not beg for attention but commanded it softly. Olamide stood near the chief, her arms crossed, her chin lifted high. She wore bracelets of bronze and a wrapper embroidered with peacock feathers, symbols of pride and beauty. But even her laughter seemed thinner that day, uncertain beneath the weight of unspoken guilt. Her father sat on his carved stool of power, the symbol of leadership polished and gleaming in the sunlight. Around him, elders waited to judge the new works, their faces unreadable. When Abony approached the center of the square, the murmurs began. "Is that her again?" someone whispered. "The girl who brought shame to the festival?" But the whispers faded as soon as she unrolled her mat and placed it gently before the chief. The moment the fabric touched the earth, a strange stillness rippled through the crowd. The mat caught the sunlight and faint golden threads flickered in its patterns like tiny flames. Abony did not speak. She simply bowed as she always had, but this time the gesture felt different. Not submission but reverence. Her silence was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of power contained. The villagers, expecting the trembling girl from before, found themselves hushed without knowing why. Even Olamide faltered, her smirk freezing as she noticed the calm light in Abony's eyes. The chief leaned forward, intrigued. "You again," he said slowly. "You returned so soon after disgrace?" Abony's voice, when it came, was soft yet steady. "Respect is not taken, my chief. It is earned. I have brought what my hands and heart have learned since then." Something in her tone struck the people deeply. There was no bitterness, no boast. Just truth. She stepped back and waited as the chief bent over the mat, his fingers brushing its golden pattern. The crowd pressed closer, eager to see. The air felt charged, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. The drums stopped. The laughter did not come. Even the leaves above stilled. Abony stood quietly, her hands clasped, her eyes lifted toward the horizon. The same villagers who once mocked her now watched in silence, sensing without understanding that something far greater than craft or pride was about to unfold. Abony's hands trembled slightly as she gently unrolled the mat before the chief, her eyes steady and calm. The golden strand she had woven glimmered faintly at first, then brightened, casting a soft radiance across the village square. The villagers stirred, murmuring among themselves, sensing something unusual in the shimmer. The sun caught the golden fibers, making them appear as though alive, flowing like molten sunlight through the intricate patterns of the mat. The designs she had painstakingly created, circles, hands, spirals and winding paths, now shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. As the crowd leaned closer, gasps spread like wildfire. The patterns moved on their own, reshaping themselves into scenes that seemed impossibly real. Figures emerged from the woven threads. A woman with her hands hidden beneath her wrapper, lifting coins from baskets meant for the poor. The villagers froze as they recognized her. Olamide, the chief's daughter, depicted stealing from those she had mocked so easily. Another figure appeared. The elders, once revered for their wisdom, now shone collecting extra food from communal stores and whispering lies to manipulate villagers into obedience. Every fold, every spiral, every golden thread told a story of deception, exploitation, and pride built on the backs of the powerless. The villagers stared in stunned silence. Eyes that had once laughed at Abony widened in shock. Some dropped to their knees, clutching their chests, unable to comprehend the revelation unfolding beneath the sunlight. Even the chief, who had always assumed that his daughter's beauty and status shielded her from consequence, leaned forward, his fingers brushing the glowing mat as if to touch the truth itself. The wind seemed to hush around them, carrying the pulse of the mat into every heart. Abony stood with her back straight, her voice barely audible above the gasps. "See now," she said softly, "how hollow laughter becomes when truth is woven before it. See how respect is earned, not taken. This is not vengeance, nor pride, but revelation." Her calmness was a stark contrast to the uproar around her. There was no malice in her eyes, only clarity, only the quiet certainty of someone who had walked through shame and returned unbroken. Olamide's face turned pale, her lips parting in a silent cry of shock. She stepped forward to snatch the mat, her fingers trembling, but the golden thread seemed to pull away from her touch, glowing brighter, almost breathing beneath her grasp. The villagers gasped again, the sight of their chief's daughter humbled by the mat she once mocked sending shivers down their spines. Every movement on the mat told a story, of unspoken cruelty, hidden greed, and lies that had passed for tradition. The elders who had commanded fear now appeared humbled, their faces unmasked in intricate detail. The mat pulsed softly, alive with the energy of justice, and yet it carried no anger. It demanded only that the villagers witness the truth they had ignored for so long. A hush fell over the square as the final images appeared. A series of hands, joined in unity, lifting those who had been crushed by pride and arrogance. The golden thread glimmered once more and the villagers understood. This was not merely a mat, but a mirror of their hearts. They had mocked, laughed, and scorned the humble girl, unaware that she carried in her hands a power older than the village itself. For a long moment no one moved. Then slowly the crowd parted around the chief and all eyes turned to Ebony. The mat lay still now, golden thread resting softly on its surface. But its message had been received. The shame that once weighed on her had transformed into revelation, and the village could no longer pretend that laughter and mockery were stronger than truth. Ebony's gaze swept across them, serene and unwavering, as the air pulsed quietly with the echo of a lesson that would not soon be forgotten. Olamide's face twisted with fury as the truth on the mat became undeniable. Her lips trembled, her fists clenched, and without thinking she lunged forward to snatch it from the ground. Her fingers grazed the golden strands and instantly, a surge of light erupted from the fibers. The mat pulsed and shimmered, almost as if it had a heartbeat of its own, and the glow expanded, forming a wall of radiant energy that pushed Olamide backward. She stumbled, clutching at the air, her eyes wide with shock and fear, as if she had touched the very essence of justice itself. The villagers gasped. Mothers clutched their children and elders fell silent, their previous laughter gone, replaced with awe and unease. The golden threads glowed warmly, alive and unwavering, resisting the hand that had tried to defile them. Ebony stood still, her hands folded calmly before her, her eyes steady on the scene. There was no triumph in her expression, no malice. Only the quiet authority of someone whose dignity could not be stolen even by rage or wealth. Olamide screamed, the sound raw and desperate, but the mat would not yield. The golden fibers shimmered brighter with every attempt to tear them, and the energy seemed to sweep across the square, touching every heart. The villagers began to murmur among themselves, voices rising not in mockery but in recognition. "This is the girl we laughed at," one whispered. She holds the truth." Another voice joined, trembling with newfound understanding. "We ridiculed her humility and she holds power beyond us all." As realization spread, the crowd's anger turned sharply against Olamide. They had laughed at the only one who carried true dignity, and now the shame of their complicity pressed down upon them. Heads that had nodded in amusement now hung low in remorse. Children who had pointed and giggled pressed close to their mothers. Even the young men who had mocked Ebony in the square moments before shuffled backward, unsure of how to respond. The chief, the man whose word had been law and whose daughter had once been untouchable, fell to his knees before Ebony. His hands, heavy with age and authority, shook as he pressed them together in pleading. "Forgive me, child," he said, his voice breaking. "Forgive my blindness, my pride, and the corruption I allowed in my house. Forgive the village that failed to see what you carry in your hands." His eyes flicked toward the mat, toward the golden threads glowing with unyielding power, and he bowed his head again, humbled not just by her, but by the spirits that seemed to move through her work. Olamide slumped to the ground, her earlier defiance dissolved into terror and shame. She dared not look at Ebony, for her eyes had seen too much, the exposure of her greed, the humiliation of her pride. Around her, the villagers whispered and shuffled, all aware of the lesson being delivered. Humility and truth could not be mocked without consequence. Ebony stepped forward slightly, not in anger but in quiet command. Her gaze swept the square, calm and unwavering, and the golden fibers glowed softly in acknowledgement. "Respect is not given because one demands it," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It is earned through integrity and truth." The mat settled back onto the ground, its light softening but never fading entirely. The villagers, still silent and awestruck, understood that the girl they had mocked, the one they had assumed weak, had revealed a power that transcended fear and arrogance. Olamide's pride had fallen, the chief had knelt, and the village had finally witnessed the strength of humility, a lesson that would linger in their hearts long after the light faded from the mat. As night fell over the village, an uneasy hush settled over the streets and huts. The air grew thick, electric, carrying a scent of rain and ozone that made every heart quicken. Clouds gathered above, swirling and dark, blotting out the stars, while the wind whispered through the trees like a restless spirit. Villagers gathered in the central square, their eyes wide with fear, clutching one another as thunder rumbled in the distance. The golden mat lay at Abony's feet, still pulsing faintly with its quiet glow, a reminder of the day's revelations. Then the sky seemed to shatter. Lightning tore across the heavens, illuminating figures that were no longer clouds, no longer shadows. The ancestors, the regal women in white robes who had visited Abony in her dream, appeared in the sky, their forms radiant and immense, eyes shining with the light of 1,000 suns. The village trembled as if the earth itself recognized the arrival of the spirits. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the distant clash of thunder and the soft hum that seemed to emanate from the mat. Fear gripped the villagers. "They are here to punish us," someone whispered, voice quivering. "The spirits of the ancestors, angered by our pride and injustice, have come to destroy us for our mockery and greed." Children hid behind their mothers, elders clasped their hands together, and Olamide cowered in shame, her pride now powerless in the face of divine presence. Abony stepped forward, her bare feet sinking slightly into the cool earth. Her palms rested on the glowing mat, feeling the pulse beneath her fingers, and she lifted her eyes toward the ancestors above. The wind howled around her, tugging at her wrapper and hair, but she did not falter. "Mothers, guardians of my line," she called into the storm, her voice steady despite the fear that rippled through the village. "I am here before you, and so are my people. They have erred, yes, but they have not understood. They have been blind, not cruel by choice." A flash of lightning illuminated her face, showing the calm resolve in her eyes. "I ask mercy, not vengeance. Let your judgment teach but not destroy. Let your presence guide them toward humility and truth, not fear and death." The ancestors above paused, their forms towering and radiant, their expressions unreadable. For a moment the wind stilled and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then a gentle hum rose from the mat, intertwining with the roar of the storm. The golden fibers shimmered and stretched, sending waves of light upward into the sky, reaching toward the ancestors. Abony's voice rose again, not in plea but in promise. "If they have mocked, let them learn. If they have feared, let them change. But if they are willing to walk in respect, spare them. Let them see the power of truth, not the wrath of spirits." The storm paused, a single drop of rain falling to the mat. Then another and another, until the rain fell in a steady rhythm, washing over the village with cleansing force rather than destruction. The ancestors slowly faded from view, leaving behind a sky brightened by the moon and streaks of silver lightning that now seemed gentle, like flowing rivers of light. The villagers exhaled as one, relief and awe flooding their hearts. Abony knelt for a moment, her hands pressed to the mat, feeling the pulse of her ancestors' blessing. She had not demanded power or punishment, only mercy, and the spirits had answered. From that night on, the villagers knew Abony was no ordinary girl. She was a chosen guardian of respect, the living link between the people and the wisdom of their ancestors. Her act of compassion had saved them all, and the world would never again doubt that humility carried a strength unmatched by fear or pride. The first light of dawn broke over the village, casting a soft golden glow across the wet streets and glistening rooftops. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean, scented with rain and earth. The villagers emerged cautiously from their homes, their faces a mixture of awe, humility, and newfound respect. Where there had been fear the night before, now there was quiet reverence, as if the very land acknowledged the change that had taken place. Word spread quickly that Abony was to be invited to the chief's hut. She walked through the village slowly, the golden mat tucked carefully under her arm. Children peeked from behind doorways, elders stepped aside to let her pass, and even the young men who had mocked her before lowered their heads. A gentle wind followed her, lifting loose strands of hair and carrying the faint pulse of the mat's glow. With every step, the villagers felt the weight of the lessons they had learned, the humility they had once scorned now shining as a beacon of truth. When she reached the chief's hut, the doors were flung open and the chief himself came forward, his hands raised in welcome. His usual pride had been tempered by the events of the past day and night. Behind him, Olamide knelt quietly, her face flushed with shame, eyes lowered in submission. The elders and villagers gathered, forming a respectful circle around the hut, their whispers subdued. Inside, the chief gestured for Ebony to come closer. "Child of the village," he said, his voice steady but imbued with reverence, "you have shown us what we could not see. You have humbled pride, revealed truth, and shown mercy where others might have demanded vengeance. Today you are honored as our teacher, our guide, and our protector." Ebony knelt respectfully, placing the golden mat carefully on the floor before her. She felt the pulse of the woven threads beneath her palms, alive with the strength of her ancestors and the truth she carried. She looked at the villagers, meeting their eyes one by one. There was no arrogance in her gaze, only the quiet confidence of someone who had walked through shame and emerged unbroken. "I accept your honor," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the hut, "not as proof of my superiority, but as a reminder that humility is not weakness. It is strength misunderstood, a force that withstands laughter, scorn, and pride. True power lies in patience, in truth, and in the courage to act with integrity even when the world mocks you." The villagers bowed their heads, a gesture they had once reserved for the chief alone, now directed toward Ebony. Children mimicked the bow, elders nodded in agreement, and even Olamide lowered her forehead to the ground, silent but repentant. The chief, humbled by the moment, knelt briefly before her, a rare display of vulnerability, acknowledging the lesson she had imparted to all. Sunlight poured through the open doors, illuminating the hut and casting long golden beams across the mat. The air seemed charged with reverence, each breath carrying the weight of understanding and respect. Ebony rose, standing tall yet serene, the glow of her mat reflecting softly on her features. She had transformed the village, not through anger or retribution, but through wisdom, humility, and quiet strength. As she stepped outside, the villagers followed her gaze toward the horizon, where the sun now rose fully, a symbol of a new dawn, a dawn of honor, respect, and recognition of true strength. The girl who had once bowed in shame now walked among them as a living lesson of courage and integrity, and the village would never forget the day when humility became the greatest power of all. Years passed and the village changed in ways both small and profound. Seasons came and went, children grew into adults, and new artisans learned their craft under the careful eyes of elders who had once laughed at a humble girl. Yet through all these changes, one thing remained constant: Ebony's mat. It was no longer merely a creation of reeds and golden thread. It had become a sacred relic, a living testament to truth, humility, and the quiet strength that had transformed the village. The mat was carefully stored in the chief's hut, placed on a raised platform beneath a canopy of carved wood and woven palm leaves. It was draped with cloths of deep indigo and protected from sunlight, wind, and curious hands. Villagers would pass by it quietly, pausing to touch the edge of its fabric with reverence, feeling the warmth of its glow beneath their fingers. Though its golden threads now shimmered faintly in the subdued light, the pulse of life within it remained strong, a reminder that the lessons it carried were eternal. The elders who had once misjudged Ebony became the mat's guardians. They would bring the village together whenever they sensed pride rising too high, arrogance creeping into hearts that had forgotten the value of respect. On those occasions they would unveil the mat, laying it bare before the people. As the folds of the mat opened, the golden fibers would stir, shimmering and pulsing with an energy that seemed to respond to the hearts of those who gazed upon it. The patterns would shift and reshape themselves, forming stories as vivid as the day they had first appeared. Villagers would watch in awe as scenes unfolded beneath the golden threads. There would be depictions of leaders bowing before their people, children helping elders, and neighbors offering aid without expectation. At times, the patterns would reveal moments of subtle injustice, showing how pride or greed had begun to take root once more. The images were never cruel. They were meant to teach, to guide, and to remind. They spoke of balance, honor, and the enduring truth that respect cannot be demanded but must be earned. Parents told their children stories of Ebony's courage, of the day when the humble girl had risen and the village had learned a lesson it would never forget. Children would listen with wide eyes, imagining the glowing mat and the golden threads that revealed the secrets of the world. They learned that humility was not weakness, that kindness was not vulnerability, and that patience could be stronger than any boast or show of power. Even the chief, long after his time had passed, was remembered in these stories, a man who had knelt before a girl and learned the weight of pride. The village elders often remarked that no monument, no statue, no written word could capture the lesson as vividly as Abony's mat. It was alive, always moving, always teaching, a bridge between the past, the present, and the future. Generations came and went, yet whenever arrogance dared to rise, the mat would glow again. Its patterns would dance in golden light, whispering truth into every heart that had forgotten the value of humility. The village never forgot Abony, not just the girl who bowed in shame, but the woman whose quiet strength had reshaped the world around her. The mat endured, a sacred relic and a living teacher, carrying forward the day when truth had knelt before humility and the moment when respect had finally been understood. Through it, Abony's spirit remained with the village, guiding, reminding, and inspiring every generation to walk with integrity, to honor others, and to remember that true strength always begins with the courage to bow. Generations passed, yet the story of Abony remained alive in the hearts and minds of the villagers. Mothers would gather their daughters by the riverbank, the scent of fresh water mingling with the earthy aroma of the surrounding forest, and recount the tale of the girl who once bowed in shame but rose in unmatched dignity. Each telling carried a different nuance. Sometimes it was her courage, other times her wisdom, and always her unwavering humility. Children would listen, eyes wide, imagining the golden threads of her mat glowing in the sun, revealing truths that even the proud could not hide. Abony's name became more than a memory. It became a proverb, whispered and repeated in homes and marketplaces alike. To bow with truth is to rise with honor. The villagers spoke it often, a reminder of the balance between humility and strength, a principle guiding both young and old. When a young woman hesitated to stand for what she knew was right, an elder would place a gentle hand on her shoulder and murmur, "Remember, Abony. Bow with truth, rise with honor." And the young woman would straighten her spine, emboldened by the knowledge that integrity carried power beyond wealth, position, or fear. The mat itself remained a sacred relic, but over time, it became more than a physical object. It became a symbol, a bridge between the living and the ancestral, a connection to a past that demanded respect. Whenever arrogance began to creep into the village, the elders would unveil it, and its golden threads would shift and shimmer, casting images of lessons learned long ago. Villagers would see pride humbled, greed exposed, and kindness honored, reinforcing the wisdom passed down from generation to generation. And yet, even with the mat preserved, Abony's presence was felt everywhere. Fishermen on the river would glimpse a faint glow beneath the water's surface and feel her gaze upon them, gentle but vigilant. Children playing along the banks would sometimes catch a shadow moving through the reeds, watching silently, teaching them to tread with care and honesty. Travelers passing through the village often remarked on the air of peace and respect that lingered here, sensing without knowing that a spirit walked among them, a guardian of humility, a living testament to the power of integrity. Elders often spoke of how Abony's spirit seemed closest to the river, where the water flowed endlessly, reflecting both the sky and the people who lived beside it. She watches, they would say, those who walk with humility, those who act with courage, and those who carry respect in their hearts. She watches, and her guidance flows like the river, gentle yet unstoppable. Mothers would tighten the wraps of their daughters' eyes, twinkling as they added, "Live as Abony lived. Bow when truth calls, rise when honor demands it." Even in the quietest moments, when the village slept and the wind rustled softly through the palm trees, the story of Abony whispered across the riverbanks. It reminded everyone that dignity is not always loud, that strength does not always roar, and that true honor often comes from the courage to bow in silence and rise with integrity. And so, Abony's legacy endured, not merely in stories or golden threads, but in the very spirit of the village itself. Mothers, daughters, elders, and children alike carried her lesson in their hearts, walking with humility, observing truth, and acting with courage. And somewhere by the river, shimmering faintly in the morning light, her spirit remained, watching, guiding, and blessing all who dared to live with honor. The girl who had once bowed in shame had risen forever, a guardian and a beacon, teaching that true strength is always measured by the courage to remain humble and the wisdom to let truth shine.